So last week we talked about character and companions and correction. And we kind of wrapped up with correction, and the teaser this week is that we were going to spend some time talking about talking. And seems like a nice transition from the discussion of correction. One thing that we covered last week gave us a little bit of insight into things we need to consider in our speech. And we talked a lot about tone and technique. In other words, when you are going, we talked about what's hard about approaching a friend with the idea of we're going to correct them. We're going to apply some sort of correction or suggest some sort of correction to them. And we talked about being careful and mindful of our tone and our attitude and how we approach them. But we didn't really quite get all the way through. And when we finished, actually, Brother Mike Youngblood came up to me and he says, that's all true, but sometimes you got to have some tough love. And I think he's right. Our consideration of tone is important because it needs to convey our concern. But sometimes that concern needs to come in a rebuke, which is not quite the same thing as a correction, right? A rebuke is a little stronger. I've heard brethren be rebuked by another brother, and he said, that's just sin. And he's just laid it out to them and said, what you did is sin. But there was no doubt where he was coming from. I've seen other brethren approach people and say, you really need to consider what you're doing here because it's taking you down a path that, isn't good, isn't righteous, isn't healthy. Right? There's a big difference between those two approaches. But the heart is the same for both of them, which is that we're trying to communicate to somebody and get some interaction going. And the point is, in all of those cases, we need to get the point across. We need not be so gentle that they don't know what we're talking about. At the same time, we may not be so harsh that they think that we are just pounding them and that we don't have any love for them or any concern for them. So there's a balance that we have to think about. But I think the one thing that we can see from Proverbs is that even rebuke is something that is likely to come to all of us. Proverbs 17:10 says, rebuke is more effective for a wise man than 100 blows on a fool. And what that tells me is you could be a really wise man and somebody needs to pull you aside and have a little rebuke talk. You can get a little too smart. You can get a little too advanced, a little too confident, and you may need to get pulled aside for some rebuke. And so we need to think about rebuke is something that might be for all of us at some point. And so where do we go with that? Well, what is the golden rule, right? How would I like to be approached and rebuked if I'm in error, right? I want somebody to come to me that is demonstrating concern for my soul and not just trying to get me, because they caught me doing something. And so we need to make sure that we are finding that balance because we all get it from time to time. Another place where that's referenced is Proverbs 19:25. It says, I think that's the wrong one. Let me look again. That's 20 and 25. 19:25 says, strike a scoffer, and the simple will become wary. Rebuke one who has understanding, and he will discern knowledge. That's the intent, right? You rebuke somebody with understanding, and they get it, right? They understand that you have a concern for them, and they are examining themselves and saying, you know what? That person's right. I need to make some sort of a change. So we need to understand that we may not be able to control how things are accepted, but we can totally control how we deliver that message. Some people are going to get mad no matter what you tell them, either because they're not interested in receiving the correction, or they think that you have bad attitudes. We can only control what we control, which is our approach, our tone, our technique, our attitude. So I wanted to kind of start the class by kind of pulling back some of the stuff from last week and bringing that into the discussion about how we talk. So let me stop there and see if there's thoughts on that. Matt, you've got a thought.
One of the things that strikes me about these last two proverbs is, it's good for us as speakers to pay attention to how we are presenting what we say. But I think both of these put a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of the hearer too. That if somebody says something to us that we don't like, we can look for reasons in their presentation to pick their presentation apart and so discard the message. When it is often the case that somebody who comes to us in an obnoxious way actually has a point, and you just have to have the humility to get through the obnoxious to see the point.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And Matt, if you didn't hear him, was talking about, these proverbs talk about the receiving of that rebuke and how are you going to do it. And whether it's not delivered very well or not, you have a responsibility to evaluate the critique, to evaluate the advice you've been given and say, you know what, not very well presented, but true. And I need to do something about that. Other thoughts? Yes, sir.
The texture of a person's heart, going with what Matt said, the hearer, the texture of that person's heart will determine how hard you have to go at them with a rebuke. As I read that, it says a rebuke goes deeper into a man. That gives me a texture picture. It's like drilling into hard ground. You need a drill for that, and soft ground you need to shove. And so I think that's important that we discern the texture of that heart.
Yeah, well, he's talking about the texture of the heart kind of drives some of that. And you get that from these proverbs, right? I mean, rebuke to a wise man is better than 100 blows to a fool, right? Somebody who is just determined they're not really interested in what you have to say, it may not make any difference what you tell them, but you did what you could do. Thoughts? Yes, sir.
Nobody likes to be rebuked or corrected. The lifelong thing is you find something before you rebuke somebody, before you correct somebody, you find something good to say about this guy to him. Say, hey, you do a good job, you do a good work of all this, but
how you put those things together, right? Yep. Andy.
1 Thessalonians 5:14 says, "I exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all." So there's different people with different types of problems, and you deal with them differently. Those who are unruly, you warn. It's a stronger kind of thing. Those who are just mistaken, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. 1 Thessalonians talks about warning unruly and comforting the faint, right? Or, it is a difference in approach based on what you know about that person. Anything else there? Charlie.
The rebuke is to save the person's soul, as far as spirituality is concerned. So you got to be careful on how you do the rebuking. And everybody is differently. But it's the person that goes to do it and his attitude and his love for that person's soul is how he's going to have that conversation.
Yeah, and that's exactly the whole point, right? Because our focus here is on the speech. That is what are we saying to that person? And so we have to make sure that our approach is considered. And we'll talk about, some of that as we get further into tonight's lesson. I think one thing that Lester talked about is, nobody likes to be rebuked. But you look at, Proverbs 17 and Proverbs 19, and what you see in there is that, like I said earlier, there's a rebuke for all of us, right? If you read Proverbs and you don't find something that you could work on, you might need to read Proverbs again, right? Because it is, page by page, it slaps me in the face with different things. And some of them are gentle things and some of them not so gentle, right? But all of us, because we might be rebuked, we need to consider how we rebuke others. But just reading through Proverbs, there's almost a self-rebuke there, right? You can see things that you need to be better at, things that you need to do to present yourself more effectively as a servant of God. And so those are all things that, we take into account when we look in that. Okay, last thing on correction is just to remember, Proverbs tells us whom the Lord loves, he chastens, right? It's not because God is wanting to just smack you upside the head. He wants to smack you upside the head because he loves you and he wants you to do better. And it's no different than those of us who are parents when we correct our children. We'd really rather just give them candy. They love us a whole lot more than when we're correcting them. But that's not the solution. That's not for their ultimate good. And so we have to be able to look broader than that. So from that discussion of correction, I talked a little bit in kind of the prep for this week about what's the connection between how we talk and our judgment, or where our mind is. And I think that connection is important because when we talk about, our mind and our judgment, what we're really talking about is something that not only reveals, speech often reveals our character or our state of mind, but it also, it influences our speech. And I'll give you a couple of examples when we talk about influence on our speech. In Proverbs 15 and verse 28, I love this verse. It says, "The heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil." So there's something about being influenced by a thoughtful mind, a mind that is focused on doing the right thing, that helps us control ourselves. I mentioned in the Facebook post, James says, the tongue is an unruly evil. It's a world of fire. It's really hard to control. But one of the things we can do to try to get control of that is what we do before we ever open our mouth. And that's what, in Proverbs 15, when he says, the heart of the righteous studies how to answer, it's not always in the moment, right? It's how am I going to answer when I'm confronted with something next week, or when I'm confronted about this issue. And that might be informed by a Facebook post that you read that you say, wow, that's, somebody came back really strong on that person. I wonder how I would react if I was confronted that way. Those are the kinds of considerations that kind of go into what we're doing. And again, kind of referencing back to James 1, he says, let everybody be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. And how do you do that? Well, you're doing a little thinking before you allow words to exit out of your mouth. And that's, I think, everybody. If we all had something we could work on, sometimes we say things before we think about it, right? And that's how you get cliches like, you can't unring that bell. You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. All of those cliches, it's because once it's out there, it's out there. And you could say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it, but you said it. And so I really like this verse from the standpoint of considering that. Also, Proverbs 17 and verse 9 says, he who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends. And to me, that's a discussion of once you come into, possession of certain information, you have a little bit of a responsibility to think about, what are you going to do with it? Is this the kind of thing that needs to be repeated? Or is this the kind of thing that I'll just let it sit right here and I'll let that go, right? Because sometimes just passing information along is going to cause a problem. And that's not where we want to be either. So again, it has to do with your consideration and allowing your mind and your judgment to influence your speech rather than just blurt something out. Thoughts? Yes, Carolyn.
This is true, doesn't mean you have to say it.
Yes, just because it's true does not mean you have to say it. Carolyn, you are 100% right. Yes.
And we have to think about things in an appropriate way before we say them. Sometimes my darling, not very often at all, but sometimes my darling husband will do something that drives me crazy.
No.
I know. And then I think about it, and I think, and the more I think, the worse it gets as it comes out of my mouth, because I'm not thinking usefully about it. I'm not thinking about, why did he do that? How can I respond appropriately? I'm thinking, what a scoundrel. What is wrong with him? What? And the more I fixate on it, I'm not thinking wisely.
Right.
And so what comes out of my mouth isn't any more useful. Sometimes it's worse than it would have been had I just blurted in the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction, and I just love the image of Matt as a scoundrel, by the way. I love that terminology. That is just beautiful. But I think your point is an important one, which is, it's talking about having a heart of the righteous, studying how to answer. It's studying with the right attitude. How do I present this information? If I'm going to say it, let me say it in a constructive way. Let me say it in a way that maybe it's not positive, but I'm also not dropping the flamethrower on you for not putting the dishes away, right? Or whatever, whatever it is y'all, do that I can't imagine Matt either as a scoundrel or doing anything incorrect. So it's hard for me to envision this. We'll have to talk after. But
Yeah, you'll get your money in a little bit.
yeah. Every little bit helps. The Arney Retirement Fund is moving on. But yeah, that's the thing, right? Considering not only how to answer, but whether you should answer at all, whether you should pass that information along. There are some times when you kind of are obligated to do that, right? But not always. And that's, again, a judgment that you're making from a point of righteousness, not like, wow, have I got something really good to say, and I can't wait to tell my friend, whoever, what I just saw. That's where you're going to end up getting in trouble because of that energy that's around that. Matt.
Accompanying all of this is the question of, what am I trying to accomplish with what I say? Am I saying this because it will make me feel better? Am I saying this because it's fun to gossip and we'll celebrate how righteous we are compared to the person we're gossiping about? Or am I saying this because I'm trying to help someone?
Yeah, and Proverbs talks about that, right? The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, right? They just taste so good when you're passing them around, but that's temporary. That's not righteousness. That's not appropriateness. And so we have to be careful about what we're passing and why. Andy.
There's a difference between sin and something that irritates us. Just because Matt may skin a groundhog on the dining room table doesn't make it sinful.
It's on the deck.
Oh, my bad. I mean, you rebuke someone who needs correction because they have sin. You don't always have to rebuke someone because they do something that irritates you.
Yeah, and to put a really dated reference out there, I had a friend when I was getting ready to get married saying, look, it just ain't Ozzie and Harriet every day, right? I mean, you're not going to see eye to eye every day. You're going to have irritations, things that you're just aggrieved by, but it's not necessarily sin. You need to solve that. But at the same time, there are things that you need to be considering. So that's where it influences our speech. But from a standpoint of interacting with other people, it also reveals, our speech reveals our mind, our heart, our character, right? And so if you look at chapter 12 and verse 13, it says, the wicked is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, right? A wicked person's going to reveal himself by the way that he talks. And again, verse 16 of that says, a fool's wrath is known at once, but a prudent man covers shame. Even verse 23 says, a prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims foolishness, right? you learn a lot by just sitting back and listening to people talk. And you learn a lot about, kind of where they're coming from, where their heart is, and you can make judgments appropriate to that. Now, I'm not saying that that reveals somebody as irretrievably broken and you can't do anything with them, but I am saying that you listen to somebody's conversation, they will give you a sense of where they're at. And, we all know, to one extent or another, I'm going to go out with all of us know, somebody who does not manage their speech well. And, they swear, they boast, they threaten, they lie, maybe they do all of those things, right? And you hear that conversation that comes out of their mouth, and you start wondering, why? Why is this person expressing themselves in this way? Do they have an angry spirit, right? They're just full up of anger, and this is how they let it out. Do they have low self-esteem, and the only way that they're going to, try to build that up is try to impress you with, great feats that aren't actually physically possible for that person, so it must not be true. Or is it just immaturity, right? They think it's cool, right? Swearing is really cool. Or is it just foolishness, right? Proverbs would lump all of that together in a conversation that says that is foolishness. And kind of taking it back to the discussion of correction, what we should be trying to do with that person is try to show them a better way. Try to show them what that does to, their reputation, what that does to how they are perceived. And when we work with people who have problems with, they just can't be mad about something. They have to be, 100 degrees mad about it, and they have to yell and scream and just explode on you. That's a person that's got some things to work on, right? It's not just what they're saying, but what they're saying changes your perception of them. And a lot of times, particularly with younger people, they don't see that. And so, opportunities abound for us to say, in the right way, kind of going back to the discussion about how do you approach somebody like that, but you want to make the point, this is not benefiting you. It may make you feel temporarily better to vent it out like that, but you might be better to go off and hit a punching bag or take a 5-mile walk or something else. You might be better off to just swallow what you're about to say to your boss because he made you mad. Because there are going to be consequences, whether it's perception, whether it's how you're treated, whether there are actually consequences like you're just about to lose your job because you could not contain it. So I'm going to say all of us have a sense of people that we know that have those kinds of issues. First of all, we need to be making sure that's not us. But at the same time, we also, have an opportunity to try to help those people understand, that there's a better way. Thoughts about that? Okay, so let's talk about, I think there are some obvious ways that our speech gets us into trouble. So let's throw a few of those things out there. What's one way that your speech gets you in trouble? You can speak, it's okay, this won't get you in trouble. Lee.
You can get in trouble that way is listening to what someone else tells you, which the first thing out of their mouth is, I heard. Well, I heard comes second, third, and fourth person. And then if I repeat it, it's all on me. So, we need to be careful. I heard.
Yeah. It's gossip, right? It's, I heard this, and therefore I'm passing that along. Gossip is one of those things that's going to get us in trouble, and it's one of those things that we hear about. And early on in Proverbs, right? I mean, there are a lot of places where, we hear somebody, passing along the information. Proverbs 11:13 talks about a talebearer revealing secrets. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not, but, hence the term talebearer, right? And there's a lot of references to that. There's a wholesomeness to our speech that is lacking when we're gossiping, because what we're essentially passing on. It's very rare that gossip entails, let me tell you what an awesome guy I heard Lee Nicholson was, right? Not that I don't hear that, but that's not what gossip feasts on, right? Gossip feasts on the negative. No, you're just having some fun? Drew's having some fun back there. I'm not going to say anything. Yeah, you guys meet up after.
You need to choose the right time as far as a crowd or not a crowd. Criticize in private, praise in public, that sort of thing. Because if it doesn't need to be said publicly, if it's one person that you're talking to, don't say it publicly.
Yeah, Al says there's a time and place for criticism and for praise, and you need to know about that, because otherwise you get yourself into trouble. Absolutely true. Yes, Lester?
Really you have to work on your attitude over the years. I'm sure everybody's seen it, that I got your attitude. I've seen it a lot of times, a lot of people have that.
Yeah, absolutely true. So we're starting to get onto there. Let's take the most obvious one. What about lying? Right? I mean, let's get to that one early. Proverbs 6, right? 6 things the Lord hates, 7 are an abomination to him. Proud look, a lying tongue, and he who bears false witness. 2 of the 7 about lying, essentially, false witness and a lying tongue. The Lord hates. That's going to get you into some problems. What else? Speaking in anger, absolutely. Not being able to check your tongue. And a lot of that, like I said, it talks about our speech reveals what we're doing. And sometimes it feeds on itself, right? So, Proverbs 12:18 says, there's one who speaks like a piercing of a sword, right? It is wicked conversation, it's brutal. Proverbs 15:1 talks about a harsh word stirs up anger. Somebody who starts off angry and says something, and then it's on, right? Now we're going back and forth, and we're just feeding off of that conversation. So absolutely true. How else do we get in trouble?
Too much, it shows you don't have much intelligence.
Absolutely. Proverbs 10:19, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. Proverbs 13:3, he who guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens his lips shall have destruction. 17:27, he who has knowledge spares his words. A man of understanding is of a calm spirit. I'll fess up, 6th grade, I was selected for a part in a play. Part in the play was Motor Mouth. There was a reason why I was selected for that part in the play. So, that's one of the things that I am rebuked by when I go through Proverbs, is sometimes I like to talk. Actually, not sometimes, I always like to talk. Sometimes I talk too much, and sometimes, 2 ears, 1 mouth is much better kind of ratio. So absolutely true. You don't have anything valuable to say, you've got, things that are just going to lead you in the wrong direction. Anything else?
Before they hear it.
Yeah, they have all the answers, right? We talked, I think it was last week, talking about answering a matter before you hear the whole thing, right? I already know the answer before you finish telling the story. Let me tell you what you should do, right? And it is exactly that kind of idea, is that we're busy doing that instead of listening. What about just inappropriate conversation? Let me summarize it that way. We could talk about gossip in that sense. We could talk about slander in that sense. Or we could just talk about, subject matters that just cause problems. Now, I'm going to go back to Proverbs 6, right? Proud look, a lying tongue, hands that run to shed innocent blood, bearing false witness, and he who sows discord among the brethren. How does he sow discord? It's probably got something to do with their mouth. It would be my guess. It's hard to, he's not talking about literally sowing seeds. He's talking about creating problems in the church. And that, that could be any manner of inappropriate conversation, whether it is gossip, whether it is kind of backbiting, whispering, some of the things that we find some of the early churches being rebuked for in the New Testament, right? That we need to be careful about. Proverbs 10:32 says, the righteous knows what is acceptable, the mouth of the wicked what is perverse, right? This is where you get into all of those things that we talk about in terms of appropriate speech, telling the dirty jokes, right? Or telling, the New Testament calls it coarse jesting, right? Joking about things that you really got no business joking about. All of that kind of conversation. And really it is about understanding what is acceptable. So it goes back to what in my mind am I thinking about? Where am I spending my time in my head? Jesus talks about the heart is what produces all of these evil actions. What's in my head? What am I spending my time on? That's what I'm going to be talking about. Lauren.
And I think part of that too is knowing how to push each other's buttons, and whether we do. I know my father well. I know exactly what will get him, get his ire up to stroke level, because I know him well. And so it's a question of, do I go in and intentionally say, let's see if we can stroke Dad out today and push those buttons? Or do I say, nothing good will come of the conversation about politics, so we're just not going to go there because it's not useful here?
Yeah, and useful is a good word, right? Because our conversation should be with value. It should have usage other than, knowing how to push a button. I have a conversation with my brother on a semi-regular basis, and he doesn't know he's pushing my buttons, but he is. We're not super close, but, I don't know if he realizes he is pushing my buttons, but he pushes my buttons a lot. And I try to explain to him nicely that he's doing that, but he is who he is. So that's a case where I'm trying to offer some correction, and it's not really being well received. But you can still try to have that value, right? In your case, maybe your dad's going to start talking politics, and you're like, yeah, we're not going there, right? So, there is that balance to be struck. Other ones. Let's see what I got on my list here. Boasting, right? Pride. This idea that I need to tell you how wonderful I am, right? Now, you all know how wonderful I am, so I don't really need to tell you. But it is a problem. Proverbs 25:14, I love this. Whoever falsely boasts about giving is like clouds and wind without rain. Verse 27 in the back half says, to seek one's own glory is not glory. And then, 27 verse 2, let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger, not your own lips, right? Again, what does the boastful spirit reveal, right? Somebody who's got to tell you how wonderful they are. little bit of self-reassurance probably. I mean, I'm no psychiatrist. I can't tell you the deep inner reasons why people do it, but nobody really likes to be told how wonderful, you know, you don't want to hear me tell you how wonderful I am. There you go. I can say it that way, right? Lee.
In that regards, we had a preacher here many years ago, I won't call his name, but he would always say, a man that toots his own horn is blowing on the small end of a trumpet.
There you go. So, you know, that kind of, you know, the notion, and I mean, if, you know, again, big topics in Proverbs, right? Pride, arrogance, you know, and you look at the words, you know, that don't necessarily specifically tell you pride, but it talks about he who despises the poor, he who despises his neighbor, a scornful person, right? Those are people who are all looking out at an audience and saying, you all are in some way or another beneath me. And that attitude becomes manifest in my speech. And so those are all ways, you know, that we can kind of get ourselves into a hole. And then just kind of generically, there is just ignorance and foolishness, right? Which kind of goes a little bit to what Charlie said when you just talk too much and you don't have anything to say. But in Proverbs 18, 6 through 8, it says, a fool's lips enter into contention, his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, they go down into the inmost body, right? Those are just people who are talking foolishness, right? And back to Lauren's comment about useful speech, you know, and again, I'll refer you to James. James likes to talk about the tongue a lot, and he talks about blessing and cursing coming out of the same mouth, right? That's not valuable. I saw a smile. Did somebody have a comment? One of you have a comment, or you're just having a moment? There you go. Fair enough. All right. Any other thoughts about that?
It's not just our mouth, it's our fingers on electronics too.
Ooh, you're going to be relevant and make a comment about like internet usage? Wow. Okay. Well, Bradley's right? Our speech no longer is limited to the verbal communication out of our mouth. It is reply all, or it is I gotta post, right? I gotta get this one zinger in because this person has pushed my buttons, I'm gonna push their buttons, and could not be more true, right? And has the added value of not being face-to-face, right? It is so much easier for me to blast a nameless, faceless icon that is on Facebook, and I'm never going to stand right in front of them, and I have no idea that that is a 14-year-old, 100-pound little girl, you know, or a 7'4", 600-pound behemoth that could crush me like a bug, right? I have no idea who that person is. I have no idea where they've been through. I know nothing about them, but I'm gonna get them, right? That's outstanding point. And again, all of these points, you know, relate to our speech. How are we posting online? How are we representing ourselves? Matt.
And the thing there is that if we're talking to somebody and they say something outrageous to us face to face, now, we probably don't have a whole lot of time to think about how we want to reply. But if somebody says something outrageous on social media, usually you can sit on that for a little bit and say, okay, what's the wisest way to deal with this outrageous thing? Instead of just throwing gasoline on the fire.
Yeah. And actually it works both ways, right? Matt says, you know, once you see a post, you've got a little bit of time to consider. And I keep coming back to Lauren's comment from before, but I can consider it one of two ways. What is the best way to get this person back? What is the ultimate I'm going to get them. Or, kind of to Matt's point, let me consider whether I even want to respond to this post, and if I do, what is valuable, what is useful about my post that is going to be able to, either close out the conversation with as much class as you can muster from that situation or whatever. Carolyn.
We also have to remember we're not only representing ourselves, we're representing God.
So true. And Carolyn said we're representing not just ourselves, we're representing God, right? I know several parents do this with their kids, or you did it when you were a kid, your parents did it to you. It's like, remember who you are, right? Ben leads that song, Christian, remember who you are, right? It is important for us to recognize that our personal satisfaction is not what it is about. And so that zinger might be really satisfying, but it's like a tasty trifle. It's temporary, it goes down nice and smooth, it feels good, but did it represent God, in his way? And honestly, when I was first working, I told you last week, I think it was, how easily influenced I am. I got into a habit of swearing. About the time I got fairly serious about church. And I found myself periodically, one gentleman in particular saying, and you call yourself a Christian. And, there you go, right? I mean, that, not even a brother, but he called me, that was a rebuke, right? What do you do from that? And I can say, well, you're certainly not a Christian, but it, the truth stings, right? The truth hurts. And so you have to be able to absorb that and say, you're right, I'm not effectively representing who I say I am. What am I going to do about that? How am I going to respond? And it is funny how you can take that and use that to motivation to change. Because every time I would slip after that, I would say, wait a minute. And I would go back to whoever I slipped in front of and say, I shouldn't have said that. And that's hard conversation, right? Because they don't even know what you said. You know what you said, but they're just used to it, right? You say, well, I said this, and I really shouldn't have said that. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a very strange conversation, but it's the only way that for me, that I could get myself straight, because I didn't want to continually be embarrassed going back to people and saying, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah. So great point. Any other ways you can think of that get us into trouble? Yes, sir.
You guys ever have those, friends that you'll be in a conversation with, and they won't necessarily listen to what you're saying, but just wait until you end so that they can speak. And that's the whole concept of having a conversation with you is, when can I speak? When can I do that? And I mean, the book of Proverbs kind of, it's an advice book. It's all about wisdom. And like Proverbs 18, verse 2, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only expressing his opinion. And that's exactly what, some people do. And that hurts you not only in a religious setting, but it's going to hurt you in the world just the same, because no one's going to want to converse with you.
Yeah. It was so hard for me not to cut you off in the middle of that just to make your point. It was killing me. But that is, so if you didn't hear him, he was talking about people who are waiting for you to finish, not because they're listening to you, but because they're getting ready to say what they're going to say, right? And they're not having a conversation. They're having a one-way conversation interrupted by you going blah, blah, blah to them, right? And just a really exceptional point that is something that's very dangerous that we have to be careful about. Do you have a thought, Lauren?
I think constant negativity should go on the list too. I can say it because I'm a woman, but there's a lot of proverbs about negative, harping women. And, the corner of the house is better than, and it's both sexes. Everybody can get into a habit of negativity, and no matter what happens, what comes out of your mouth is a gripe and a complaint and a grumble about something about that. And it becomes a habit, just like swearing or lying or anything else. It becomes habitual.
Yeah, I think, so Lauren's talking about just becoming negative, right? Everything out of your mouth is negative. And that is such a good segue, because I was just going to go to, because I think, I want to acknowledge it, first of all, because you're right. And my wife and I have periodic conversations about certain people that we know that we are trying to influence to not be constantly negative. Because it wears on you as a hearer. And if you are that way, it wears on people who hear you. And so, something to work on. But at the same time, there are so many things about Proverbs that talk about speech that is preserving, that is uplifting. In Proverbs 10, there are several of them. So I'm going to just reference a couple of things in Proverbs 10 specifically. In verse 11, it talks about the mouth of the righteous is a well of life. Verse 13, wisdom is found in the lips of him who has understanding. Verses 31 and 32, the mouth of a righteous brings forth wisdom. Verse 32, the lips of the righteous know what is acceptable. And then, chapter 15, verse 23, a word spoken in due season is good. 16:13, righteous lips are the delight of kings. 16:24, pleasant words are like a honeycomb. There are so many places in Proverbs where the contrast is from foolish babble and chatter to a word spoken fitly, a word that lifts the heart, something that will lift the spirit of the hearer. And so many of those things are what we should have and be able to deliver to the people that we interact with. We should always have a good word, because no matter what's going on, Jesus is still our Savior, right? No matter what is going on, we have a God who loves us. And all of those things, are elements that we can use in our speech to uplift or to impart a good word to somebody that's having a really bad day or is just kind of caught in negative. And so we want to strive to have that good word all the time. We're about out of time. I'm going to go ahead and close. Oh, go ahead, Harvey.
The Bible talks a lot about food, and I myself, I'm sort of reluctant to call it by the food. And I just wondered, does the Bible ever call a specific person a food?
I think that there are places where you are being, people are called fools, and almost never in a good sense. But there are certainly places where the Lord calls people foolish, right? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God.
Lashes. Maybe that's just telling us that we're wasting our time.
Yeah, but it's not literally 100 lashes, right? It's the idea of, a wise man will hear that more effectively than just beating the daylights out of a fool, right? So that's kind of the issue there. Okay, so not sure what we're talking about next week, but I'm sure that whatever it is, it'll be out of Proverbs. I guarantee you that. So I'll get more information to you. Thanks, everybody, for your help.
Majesty, power, and strength to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord.